Amen. Glory to Jesus Christ. There's a story about a young cowboy who was driving down a dirt road with his dog riding in the bed of the truck and his horse in the trailer behind. And as he was driving, he came around a sharp curve and he lost control and got into a terrible accident. Sometime later, an officer shows up and he sees the horse first and it's suffering badly. So he takes out his gun and puts the horse out of his misery. Afterwards, he sees the dog, and the dog is whimpering and whining and hurt and near death. So he takes his gun and puts the dog out of his misery. Finally, he sees the cowboy in the ditch, broken, fractured, muscles are all broken and everything's done with him. And he sees this young cowboy, the officer, and he goes, "Are you okay?" And the cowboy jumps up on his feet and he goes, "I've never felt better." In this morning's gospel, there's a reference to a story that assumes we all know. Christ speaks about Moses lifting up a serpent in the wilderness. After being enslaved for over 300 years, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. They were finally free. And at first, they were happy and they were thrilled because they were free. But just after 1 month, guess what the people started to do? They complained. They complained about being hungry. They complained about not having enough food or water, living in the desert. They even said it would have been better for us to stay in Egypt and live as slaves. But you know what? Their complaining didn't last long, because you know what happened? God sent venomous snakes to those people who were complaining, and they were killed instantly. It didn't take long for them to realize that they messed up. So immediately they go to Moses and they beg for forgiveness and they asked that God would give them some relief. So then, hear the story that's referenced in today's gospel. God instructs Moses to make a serpent out of bronze, set it on a pole, so that if anyone was bitten by the snake, all they needed to do was look up at this bronze serpent and be healed. If they were bitten by the snake, they would be healed by the sight of the snake, the bronze serpent. Sound familiar? Jesus references this serpent being lifted up, an agent of death and destruction, and he likens this serpent to himself. But instead of being lifted up on a pole, he's going to be lifted up on a tree, on the cross. And the tree, like the serpent, once an agent of death and destruction, has now become a symbol of victory and life. So too must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. You know, we're not much different than the Jewish people of the Old Testament. In fact, we're pretty much the same. We eat good food, yet we complain when we're hungry. We sleep on beds, yet we complain that we're tired. We work, yet we complain about the job. There's no shortage of complaints. And there's a book that I just read, thanks to John Kelly, our good friend here, and it's called The No Complaining Rule. I went to Barnes & Noble on Friday and read the entire book on Friday. I'm not going to regurgitate everything I read, but it's a really good book, and I highly recommend it. The author, this No Complaining Girl, doesn't suggest or doesn't say that you're not going to complain or that you should never complain. But he suggests that we use the negative things that we complain about and turn them into something positive. What good is it going to do if you complain about something and you're not going to do anything about it? The Jews who complained about life in the desert quickly learned that they would be killed in an instant if they kept on complaining. Now, I don't believe God is threatening to kill us when we complain. But if we're not being mindful about what we complain about, then we can kill ourselves spiritually. Think about the things in your life, your belongings. Think about your home, your cars, your clothes, the food. Think about the people, your parents, your spouse, your children, your neighbors, your friends, Amazon delivery drivers. And now ask yourself, what do I complain about? In this country, we really have first world problems. Wouldn't you agree? When Amazon doesn't show up the same day, we get mad. We might get tempted to complain a bit. There's so much we can complain about if we choose to focus on all that is wrong. You might say, my parents don't understand. My children don't listen. My home is too small. My car is too old. The Israelites quickly learned that their complaining led to their immediate death. Luckily for many of them, they learned that when they went to God for forgiveness and reconciliation, their complaining would be transformed into praising. Their complaining would be transformed into praising. And that's the goal for us, brothers and sisters, that we transform what we complain about into something that we can be praising about. Like them, the people of the Old Testament, we're not instructed to look at a bronze serpent hanging on a pole. We're instructed that when the snake of this world bites us, whatever that snake in our lives might be, the snake of sin, we are called to look up at this cross, this servant who appeared, who made himself like a serpent, and be healed. It plagues us, brothers and sisters. Sin is what plagues us over and over again, day after day after day. In the story that I shared earlier about the hurt cowboy, it didn't take long for him to think about how much better he was until he was faced with death. For the Israelites, it took something as drastic as venomous snakes for them to realize how good they had it. Sometimes it does take something very drastic to happen in our lives for us to have a sort of change of heart, to be grateful. Don't let that drastic thing happen to you, brothers and sisters. Don't let that day come. Let us, brothers and sisters, turn our lives around today, look up at Christ, and put all of our complaints, all of our sufferings, the things that we're anxious about, all of our sin, and nail it to the cross, which has overcome all of these things. Christ is in our midst.